So this is Chapter 2, Part 7. We're finishing up covalent bonds by talking about how many bonds an atom can form. And it's actually pretty easy to figure out. Each valence shell, think about how many electrons a valence shell can hold. And if you remember, we said that the first shell, how many electrons can be put in the first shell? 2 electrons. In the second shell, 8 electrons. And same thing for the third shell. There's supposed to be an electron there. And so on. So if a valence shell is filled, that atom will not be reactive. If the valence shell is not filled, it can, and for a covalent bond, it can share electrons in order to fill that valence shell. So let's think about carbon. So think about the periodic table for carbon. So the top number is 6. So how many electrons? 6 electrons, because there are 6 protons, 6 electrons. So how many can fit in the first shell? And I'm hoping everybody is saying 2 electrons. How many can fit in the second shell? Well, we could have a total of 8, but think about the fact that we have 6 electrons. So you can use your fingers if you want to. You just put 2 of those electrons into the first shell, so you've got 4 electrons remaining. So there's only going to be 4 electrons in the outer shell. But how many electrons could there have been? So if you had a full valence shell, that would be 8 electrons total could fit. But we put 4 electrons in there because that's all we had. So we are missing 4 electrons. So carbon can form 4 covalent bonds. So let's see if you can do the next one. So how many bonds can hydrogen form? Give you a second to think about that, knowing that the periodic table of hydrogen looks like this. So how many electrons? 1 electron. How many electrons could there be in the first shell? 2 electrons. We just put 1 in the first shell, which means we're left with 1. It can form 1 bond. It could share. And let's say we had a carbon here. And in its outer shell, it had 4. It's got 2 in its inner shell. It could share that 1 pair. So here's the hydrogen and the carbon sharing a pair of electrons. So hydrogen can form 1 bond. How many bonds can helium form? So think about that one for a second, knowing that helium has a 2 on top. So how many electrons can helium form? How many bonds can helium form? Well, first think about how many electrons does helium have? 2. And how many can have it how many can it fit in the first shell? 2. So will it form any bonds? No. Helium is going to form no bonds. So let's think about nitrogen. Knowing that nitrogen, that is the periodic table entry for nitrogen. How many protons? 7. And how many electrons? 7. So I'm going to put how many electrons in the first shell? 2. So I'll just put 2 electrons in the first shell. So 7 minus 2, how many does that leave us with? Hopefully I can do higher math here and know that leaves us with 5 in the outer shell. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Let me put it in a little differently. There we go. So we got 5 electrons in the outer shell. I could have, how many electrons could I have in that outer shell? I could have a total of 8. I have 5. I have 5 now. So that leaves me with 3 empty spaces. So it can form 3 covalent bonds. It could share 3 electrons, forming 3 different covalent bonds. And oxygen, we saw this actually in the last little video. And if you remember oxygen, that's its periodic table. So it has 8 electrons. We're going to use 2 in the first shell. So how many are going to be in the second shell? 6. So we have 2 in the first. We have 6 in the second. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the outer shell can have at most 8 electrons. We put 6 electrons in the outer shell, so we're missing 2 electrons. So we can share 2 electrons. So it can make 2 covalent bonds. So hopefully that makes sense and is all reviewed to you. In our next little video, we're going to talk about different kinds of covalent bonds. We're going to talk about polar and nonpolar covalent bonds.